Patricia O'Connor always thought her mornings were predictable. Living on the quiet south side of Chicago, she had mastered the art of juggling freelance work, a lively 10-month-old baby named Noah, and Max, their loyal but sometimes misunderstood German shepherd. That June morning, sunlight poured through the large living room windows, dancing across cream-colored couches and a sturdy wooden coffee table Michael had built himself years ago, back when they could still afford to dream big. A vase of fresh peonies, Patricia's small luxury, stood proudly in the center, filling the air with a soft, sweet fragrance. Noah sat on the carpet in his white onesie, his plump legs spread like a tiny Buddha, fascinated by the jingling keys he kept smacking against his knee. Just a few feet away, Max lay stretched out, tail twitching every time the keys chimed. Max had been with Patricia and Michael since he was a trembling pup rescued on a freezing January night. Now, at 6 years old, he was powerful, protective, and fiercely loyal. Sometimes a little too fierce, Patricia secretly thought. But to Noah, he was just Max, the warm, furry giant who watched over him like a shadow. Patricia stirred her coffee absent-mindedly in the kitchen, the baby monitor on the counter transmitting Noah's cheerful babbles. She smiled, rubbing her temples, thinking about the emails she had yet to answer. 5 seconds, she told herself. Just enough time to grab her phone from the bedroom. She walked quickly down the hall, careful not to wake Michael, who had pulled a double shift at the station the night before. The moment her hand touched the phone on the nightstand, she heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A low, sharp growl crackling through the baby monitor. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She bolted back toward the living room, her mind blank except for one thought: Max. Turning the corner, she froze. Noah sat exactly where she'd left him, eyes wide, little hand frozen mid-air. But Max was on his feet, fur bristling along his back, teeth bared, a deep growl vibrating in his chest. He was so close to Noah's face that Patricia could see a drop of saliva hit her baby's cheek. She barely breathed. Max, no, easy, boy. Her voice trembled as she stepped closer, pulse roaring in her ears. Max's eyes flicked to hers, wild, sharp. For a split second, she didn't recognize him. Then, behind Max, near the window, a faint movement caught her eye. Before she could scream, Max lunged. Not at Noah, but at something she hadn't even realized was there. Patricia's scream stuck in her throat as Max launched himself toward the window. The sound of his claws scraping the wooden floor cut through the air, sharp and desperate. She snatched Noah into her arms just in time, pressing his tiny head against her shoulder, her heart hammering so wildly she thought it might stop altogether. For a heartbeat, there was only chaos. Max's furious barks, the clatter of his heavy body slamming against the glass, and Noah's soft whimpers against her neck. Through the blur of fear, Patricia forced her eyes toward the window. At first, she saw nothing, just the green hedges swaying gently in the morning breeze. But then a shadow moved behind the bushes, quick and deliberate. Someone was there. She tightened her grip around Noah, stepping backward until her calves hit the couch. Max's barks were no longer protective. They were primal, savage, as if he knew exactly who or what had trespassed near his family. Patricia's mind raced. Who would dare come so close to the house in broad daylight? Michael always double-checked the doors, and their neighborhood, while not perfect, hadn't seen trouble like this in years. She fumbled for her phone with shaking fingers, but realized she had dropped it back in the bedroom. Max lunged again, this time his snarl loud enough to drown out Noah's cries. Patricia forced herself to breathe, whispering calming words into her baby's ear even as her own thoughts screamed in panic. Suddenly, Max stopped barking. He stood rigid by the window, nose pressed hard against the glass, chest heaving. Outside, there was only stillness again. No shadow, no rustle, no sign of the intruder. Patricia dared a few steps closer, peering out through the glass panes. Her eyes scanned the hedges, the driveway, the old wooden fence Michael had promised to fix. Nothing. But deep down, she knew what she had seen. Someone had been watching them. Noah's soft hiccups snapped her back. She kissed his forehead, trying to calm the tremor in her voice. "It's okay, baby. Mama's here. Max is here." Max turned his head slightly, eyes meeting hers. There was an intensity there she had never seen before, as if he was trying to warn her, to tell her he had done what she couldn't. For the first time, Patricia felt ashamed of the fear she'd felt toward him moments ago. Without Max, what would have happened to Noah? She heard the bedroom door creak behind her. Michael's voice, thick with sleep, called out, "Patty? What the hell's going on?" But before Patricia could answer, Max let out another low growl, this time not at the window, but toward the back door, where a quiet, deliberate knock echoed through the house. Patricia clutched Noah tighter. Whoever it was, this wasn't over. Michael stepped into the living room, barefoot and tense, his eyes darting between Patricia, Noah, and the trembling Max. He hadn't yet registered the fear in Patricia's face when the second knock came, firmer this time, sending a dull echo through the walls. He glanced at the back door, then at Patricia, a silent question hanging in the space between them. She pressed Noah closer, her lips trembling as she mouthed, "Someone was outside." Michael's jaw tightened. He motioned for her to stay put, then crossed the kitchen with careful, almost military steps. Michael wasn't a man easily shaken. A firefighter by trade, he'd seen his share of chaos and ruin. But the sight of his wife's pale face, Max's rigid stance, and his baby's frightened hiccups told him this wasn't some harmless prank. He peered through the small frosted window by the back door but saw only his own reflection staring back at him. The third knock came before he could decide. It wasn't polite or hesitant. It was assertive, impatient. Michael swallowed the instinct to shout through the door and instead flicked the deadbolt with a soft click. He opened it just a crack, keeping his body between whoever was outside and his family behind him. A blast of cool morning air rushed in, carrying the faint smell of cut grass and car exhaust from the street beyond. Standing on the back porch was a man Michael had never seen before. The stranger looked about Michael's age, maybe a few years older, dressed in faded jeans and a wrinkled denim jacket. His eyes were an unsettling gray, sharp and restless. He didn't smile or offer a greeting. Instead, his gaze shifted past Michael's shoulder, trying to peer inside. "Morning," the man said, his voice low but oddly polite. "I didn't mean to startle your wife. I'm looking for someone, a woman named Emily. She used to live here, didn't she?" Michael blinked. The name meant nothing to him. "Nobody by that name here," he said firmly. He tried to close the door, but the man slid a boot between it and the frame, his grin turning brittle. Max's growl rumbled behind Michael, vibrating through the floor like distant thunder. Patricia clutched Noah tighter, her eyes locked on the stranger's boots, cold dread coiling in her stomach. "Listen, friend," Michael said, trying to steady his voice. "You need to leave, now." The stranger's eyes flicked to Max, then back to Michael's face. For a heartbeat, the air felt charged, like a lit match near dry brush. Then the man leaned in closer, voice dropping to a whisper only Michael could hear. "You sure about that? Maybe you should ask your wife who Emily really is." Before Michael could react, the man stepped back on the porch, hands raised as if to show he meant no harm. But the look in his eyes promised anything but peace. Max lunged at the gap in the door, barking with a rage that made Patricia flinch. Michael slammed the door shut, throwing the deadbolt back into place. As Max kept barking, Michael turned to Patricia, confusion and betrayal fighting for space in his chest. "Patty, who the hell is Emily?" Patricia's breath caught in her throat at Michael's question. The way he looked at her now, as if he were seeing someone he didn't recognize, cut deeper than any threat from a stranger at their door. She clutched Noah so tightly that he fussed and squirmed against her chest. Max, still pacing and growling, seemed to sense the rising storm between his two humans, unsure who needed protecting now. Michael stepped closer, lowering his voice but not the edge in it. "Patty, I'm not asking again. Who is Emily? And why is some creep knocking on our door asking for her?" He ran a hand through his hair, frustration sharpening his tone. Outside, the The faint sound of a car engine starting hinted that the stranger hadn't gone far. Another shadow waiting to slip back when they least expected. Patricia's lips parted, but no words came. How could she explain something she'd buried so long ago she sometimes convinced herself it had never happened? She glanced at Max, his steady eyes locked on hers as if urging her to just say it, to trust Michael the way she always claimed she did. She kissed Noah's soft hair, inhaling his baby scent to calm her thundering heart. Michael, I swear I was going to tell you, but I didn't know how, not after Noah was born. I thought it was over. Michael's laugh was sharp and humorless. Over? Patty, what the hell does over mean? Who was that guy? What does he want with you, with us? He took a step back, hands on his hips, trying to slow the rage building under his skin. The thought of a stranger lurking around his son, his wife, made him feel helpless in his own home. And Michael O'Connor had never been helpless. Not in burning houses, not when dragging strangers out of wrecked cars. But this secrets inside his own walls made him feel small. Patricia laid Noah gently in his playpen, ignoring his protest. She turned to Michael, tears welling but her chin held high. Emily was me, is my middle name. Years ago, before this house, there were things I ran from, bad decisions. I changed my name back to my first to leave it behind. I never thought it would follow me here, to you, to Noah. Her voice cracked as she confessed. I swear, Michael, I never meant to lie. I wanted a clean start. Michael stared at her, fighting the war inside his head. Part of him wanted to pull her into his arms, to believe every word because she was still Patricia, his Patricia. But another part burned with questions she hadn't answered yet. He looked down at Max, who had stopped pacing but stayed pressed against Patricia's leg, the loyal guardian ready for whatever came next. Michael's voice was calm but cold as he finally spoke. Then you'd better tell me everything, Patty, because until I know exactly who's after you, none of us are safe. Patricia sat on the edge of the couch, her fingers twisted tightly in the hem of her sweater as Michael stood across the room, arms folded, watching her with a mix of anger and wounded disbelief. Noah babbled softly in his playpen, blissfully unaware that the world he knew, safe and warm, trembled on the edge of something darker. Max lay between them, head on his paws, ears perked for the slightest sound outside. Even now, he didn't trust the quiet. Taking a breath she wished would steady her, Patricia finally began. Before I met you, I lived in Milwaukee. I was 20, lost and angry at everyone, especially my parents. I started going out with this guy named Rick. He was charming, older, dangerous in a way that made me feel alive. She bit her lip, forcing herself to meet Michael's eyes. I thought I could change him. Instead, he changed me. Michael's nostrils flared, but he stayed silent, letting her speak. Her voice grew steadier, as if each word lifted a stone off her chest. Rick dealt with people you wouldn't believe, people who don't forgive debts. When I realized what he really did, I tried to leave. He didn't let me, not at first. But one night there was a fight, a really bad one. I packed a bag, took a bus, and never looked back. I dropped my middle name, Emily, and started over as Patricia. A bitter laugh slipped from Michael's lips. So you ran. And now he found you. He shook his head, pacing to the window and peeking out at the quiet street. It looked so normal, kids on bikes, sprinklers spraying green lawns, but it felt poison now. And you never thought he'd come knocking? Patty, you brought this into my house, around our son. Patricia flinched at the word our, because nothing hurt more than knowing she dragged Noah into her buried past. She forced herself to stand, crossing the room to place a hand on Michael's arm. I didn't know how to tell you. I kept thinking it was behind me. I swear, I've had no contact with him for years. But maybe he never really let go. Michael pulled away, not cruelly, but enough to remind her that trust once cracked didn't seal back easily. He glanced at Max, who lifted his head, sensing the tension shift from fear of an intruder to fear of what comes next. I need to know if this man, Rick, is dangerous enough to hurt us. Because if he is, I won't wait around for him to show up at night when we're asleep. Patricia's eyes burned as she whispered, He is, Michael. He's the kind of man who takes what he thinks is his. And he's not here for me anymore, he wants Noah. He'll use him to pull me back. Her voice broke into a sob she couldn't swallow. Max rose to his feet, muscles taut, as if he understood the storm outside was nothing compared to the one about to hit their home. Michael stood frozen, Patricia's confession echoing in his mind like a siren that refused to die down. He looked at Noah, who had fallen asleep clutching a soft blue blanket, blissfully ignorant of the storm swirling around him. For Michael, everything suddenly felt fragile, like glass held together by trembling hands. And Rick, a name he'd never known, had become the crack that could shatter it all. Patricia wiped her eyes with the back of her trembling hand. She hated herself for the fear in Michael's eyes. Fear not for himself, but for Noah, for their family. "Michael," she said softly, trying to reach the man who had always been her rock. "I know how it sounds, but we have to stay calm. If we panic, he wins. Rick feeds on fear. He always did." Her voice caught on the memory, her mind dragging her back to nights she had promised herself she'd forget. Max pressed against her thigh, tail stiff, nose twitching at every sound near the door. He seemed more alive now than ever, the guardian she never deserved but desperately needed. Michael's eyes dropped to Max, then back to Patricia. "I need to know exactly what we're dealing with, Patty. Does he want money? Revenge? Or is this about you?" His voice cracked, but he pushed the question out anyway. "Or is it really about Noah?" Patricia's shoulders sank. She sat back on the couch, her voice almost a whisper. "Rick always wanted a family in his twisted way. He used to say I'd be the mother of his kids, like it was my duty. When I ran, he lost control over me. But now he sees Noah as his last chance. He thinks he owns us. He'll come back, Michael. He's testing us, knocking on doors, watching windows. He's waiting for us to slip." Michael cursed under his breath, pacing to the kitchen and back. He opened a drawer, pulled out his old off-duty revolver, checked the chamber, then set it on the counter within reach but out of Noah's sight. It wasn't much comfort, but it was something. "I'm calling my captain at the station. He knows people in the department who owe me favors. We'll get a patrol to watch the house tonight. And tomorrow, I'm changing every lock on these doors." Patricia nodded, feeling Max lean harder into her leg, as if promising he'd stand his ground when steel and locks failed. She reached for Michael's hand, their fingers tangled in a desperate knot of trust that still held, fragile but real. "We'll keep him safe. We won't let Rick take our son." Michael squeezed her hand back, eyes locked on the darkened window. Outside, the world looked calm, but inside the O'Connor house, war had just been declared. Night fell over the O'Connor house like a heavy curtain no one dared to lift. Michael moved from window to window, checking each lock twice, his revolver never far from reach. Patricia sat on the floor by Noah's crib, watching him sleep. Every tiny sigh he made reminded her why she couldn't afford another mistake. Max lay at the bedroom door, head up, ears twitching at each creak and distant bark from the neighborhood beyond. Michael's phone buzzed on the kitchen table. He grabbed it, his voice a rough whisper. "Yeah, Captain. Thanks for calling back. I need a cruiser to pass by every hour tonight." "No, I'm not overreacting." He paused, glancing at Patricia through the open bedroom door. Lowering his voice, he continued, "It's a family thing, a threat. Just help me keep them safe until I figure this out." He ended the call before his captain could pry any deeper. Patricia came out of the bedroom, her shoulders squared despite the exhaustion carved into her face. "Is it enough?" she asked, her voice raw. Michael stared at her, weighing his answer. He wanted to lie, to wrap her in comforting words, but the truth was better, no matter how it hurt. "No, it's not enough, but it's a start. And tomorrow I'll talk to a lawyer about a restraining order. We'll make it official. He can't just show up anymore without consequences." Max shifted, his eyes tracking Patricia as she crossed the living room to sit beside Michael. She rested her head on his shoulder, trying to memorize the feeling of safety he always gave her, even when the world threatened to burn it all away. "I'm so sorry, Michael," she whispered. "I hate that my past is in our home now, in Noah's life. I hate that I couldn't keep it buried." Her voice cracked, but she forced herself not to cry again. Michael brushed his lips against her hair. "We deal with it together now. That's how it works. We keep him safe. We stay awake if we have to. He's our boy, Patty. No one takes him from us." He said it like a vow. Max let out a low grunt of agreement, as if echoing Michael's promise in the only language he knew. The three of them sat there, two humans and one loyal dog, bound by love and the fear of losing what mattered most. Outside, the night deepened into a silence too thick to trust. Then, just past midnight, Max's head shot up. His growl rattled low in his chest, waking Patricia and freezing Michael mid-sentence. From the back of the house, faint but unmistakable, came the soft crunch of footsteps on gravel. Someone moving where no one should be. Michael gripped the revolver, heart pounding, eyes locked on the hallway that led to Noah's room. This time, Rick wasn't knocking. He was coming in. Michael signaled to Patricia to stay behind him, his eyes sharp, every muscle ready. Max pressed close to Michael's leg, his growl growing louder, vibrating through the floorboards. Patricia felt her pulse thunder in her ears as she slipped back into Noah's room, scooping their sleeping baby from the crib. Noah stirred, eyelids fluttering, but she pressed his cheek to her shoulder, whispering a shaky lullaby to keep him calm. Outside the nursery door, Michael crept down the hallway, revolver held tight, finger hovering near the trigger but not yet on it. The footsteps came again, slow, deliberate, as if the intruder knew exactly where to step to avoid the squeaks of old floorboards. Michael's thoughts raced. How did he get in? The doors were locked. The windows? Regret stabbed at him for not checking the basement windows more carefully. Max darted ahead, nose low, body tense like a coiled spring. He paused at the end of the hallway, ears flat, growl rumbling into a snarl. Michael knelt beside him, placing a steadying hand on the dog's back. "Easy, boy," he whispered, his breath fogging in the cool draft drifting from somewhere it shouldn't be. Then he heard it. A faint metallic click, like a door latch easing open, came from the basement stairs. Patricia pressed her ear against the nursery door, straining to hear over Noah's soft breaths. She hated being apart from Michael in that moment, hated feeling powerless. She had faced Rick before, but never as a mother. This time, the stakes were her child. She kissed Noah's forehead and backed toward the closet, heart hammering so loudly she wondered if Rick could hear it too. She crouched low behind boxes of toys, praying Max would buy them time. Michael edged closer to the basement door, the revolver trembling slightly in his grip despite his years of training to stay calm under fire. Max bristled beside him, hackles high, tail rigid. Then, from the dark below, a voice drifted up, casual, mocking, like a ghost that refused to stay buried. "Mikey boy, I just want to see my family. No need for all this drama." Michael's stomach twisted at the sound of Rick's drawl. Too familiar now, too real. In a single breath, Michael flung the basement door wide. Max lunged down the steps like a missile, his bark deafening in the narrow space. Michael followed, revolver raised, heart pounding so hard he barely registered the cold concrete under his bare feet. Below, at the foot of the stairs, Rick stood with a crooked grin and a flicker of madness in his eyes, one hand behind his back. Max skidded to a halt, growling so viciously his teeth flashed white under the single bulb swinging above. Rick laughed softly, stepping sideways, forcing Michael to choose. Pull the trigger and risk hitting Max, or wait for Rick to make the first move. Patricia, clutching Noah upstairs, squeezed her eyes shut as a single gunshot exploded in the silence, rattling the walls and shattering the fragile calm forever. The echo of the gunshot seemed to hang in the air longer than the bullet itself. Patricia squeezed Noah so tightly against her chest that he whimpered in confusion, his tiny fists grabbing at her hair. She forced herself to listen, but the house had fallen into a terrible, thick silence. No footsteps, no voices, not even Max's bark. Just her heartbeat pounding in her ears like a drum that would not stop. Down in the basement, Smoke curled lazily from the muzzle of Michael's revolver. His breath came in ragged bursts as he stared at Rick, sprawled on the cold concrete, hands still outstretched toward whatever weapon he'd hidden behind his back. The bullet had struck true center mass just like his training demanded. But instead of relief, Michael felt a sickening twist in his gut. Rick's eyes were wide, a horrible mix of pain and disbelief. He tried to speak, but only blood bubbled at his lips. Max stood inches from Rick's motionless hand, hackles still raised, teeth bared at the fallen threat that had haunted this family for far too long. Michael lowered the gun slowly, the weight of it heavier than ever. He wanted to feel heroic, to feel like he had protected what mattered most, but all he felt was a bitter emptiness. Killing a man, even a monster like Rick, left a stain no soap could wash away. He stumbled up the basement steps, gripping the rail for balance. At the top, Patricia stood in the hallway, eyes wide and searching his face for answers. Her voice trembled. Is he? Michael nodded once, too exhausted for words. Noah squirmed in her arms, sensing the tension but not the danger that had finally ended in that single shot. Max padded up the stairs behind Michael, pushing his big head into Patricia's hip, demanding comfort, seeking permission to stand down. Patricia shifted Noah to one arm and reached for Michael's hand with the other. She felt how badly he was shaking. She wanted to say thank you or I'm sorry or I love you. But none of the words felt big enough for the truth they now shared. They had crossed a line together. A line between fear and survival, secrets and truth, life and death. The family they were yesterday would never be the same again. Michael leaned his forehead against hers, his voice a hoarse whisper. He's gone. He won't touch you. Or Noah. Ever. But the hollow echo behind his words betrayed what he really knew. That some men die once, but the damage they cause lives on in the quiet moments, the nightmares, the doubts that come uninvited when the world finally goes silent. As he closed his eyes, he felt Max press closer, the silent witness to everything they had endured. Somewhere deep in the house, a clock ticked on. Tomorrow they would call the police. Tomorrow there would be statements, questions, and paperwork. But tonight, all they could do was cling to each other in the dark, the echoes of the past bleeding into a fragile promise of tomorrow. Morning came slowly, as if the sun itself was cautious about peeking into the O'Connor house after the night that had torn it open. Michael hadn't slept. He sat at the kitchen table, coffee growing cold in his hands, Max lying at his feet like a silent guardian who refused to rest until every shadow was gone. He watched the sky lighten through the window, unsure whether to feel relief or grief for what he'd done. Patricia lay curled on the couch with Noah sprawled against her chest, his tiny fingers gripping her shirt as if to anchor them both to something real and good. She hadn't slept either, though her eyes closed now and then out of sheer exhaustion. She had dreamed of Rick's voice whispering her old name, of the fear she had buried for years clawing its way back to the surface. But each time she startled awake, she felt Noah's warm breath, Max's watchful eyes, and Michael's steady presence. Proof that the nightmare had ended. The police had come just after dawn. Michael had told the story in a low, even voice, his arm draped protectively around Patricia's shoulders as she held Noah tighter with every word. There were questions, paperwork, and the dull promise that a detective would follow up in the coming days. But none of it mattered more than the simple truth. The threat was gone. The family was whole. Rick's power had died with him in that cold basement. When the officers finally left, Michael sank into a chair, feeling the weight of the house settle around him like a familiar coat he'd forgotten he owned. Patricia knelt beside him, resting her head on his knee, one hand stroking Max's fur. For the first time in years, she let herself believe that she could belong here fully. No secrets, no old ghosts, no other name but the one she'd chosen to keep. Max let out a contented huff, closing his eyes at last. He had stood guard through fear, chaos, and blood. Now, with dawn warming the living room and Noah giggling softly from his mother's lap, even Max seemed to understand that his job, for now, was done. He curled up under the window where the sun could touch his fur, ears flicking only when Noah squealed his name between baby giggles. Michael reached for Patricia's hand, threading his fingers through hers the same way he had the first time he'd promised her forever. He knew they would talk about therapy, about healing, about rebuilding trust and easing the scars left behind. But for now, words weren't needed. She looked at him, eyes soft, voice barely a whisper as she said, "We're safe, Michael, because of you, because of Max." He squeezed her hand gently, letting himself believe it. Outside, the city woke up. Cars hummed down the street, neighbors walked dogs on dewy grass, and life, plain and beautiful life, returned to the house that fear once tried to claim. Inside, the O'Connors faced the quiet together, stronger than the past, braver for the future, and surrounded by the warm heartbeat of a family that refused to be broken.